Hi guys, and welcome to the latest video lesson in geography. I hope you had a lovely half term and are now looking forward to getting back into our school work. Today we are starting a new unit, and I'll explain that in a second, and that unit is something called the geographies of conflict. Today we're going to be looking at what conflict is. So your activity, as always, is to watch this video and complete any questions as instructed. Once you've done that, there will be 3 review questions at the end, which I would then like you to upload onto Satchel One. And so the topic we're going to be doing this half term is called the geography of conflict. And this module introduces us to this new issue of conflict. And we're going to be focused on the idea that conflict can influence and be influenced by geography. And this term, or this slide here, will make loads more sense after we've finished the unit. So bear that in mind, that it's quite an interesting topic, this one. And we're going to go today at looking at what those key terms are. And so the first question I have is the word conflict is used quite a lot in the English language. I'd like to pause this video for 30 seconds and just have a think about what springs to mind when you hear the word conflict. Okay, so you might have unpaused the video now, that's absolutely fine. So I'll just go through what I think of. When I think of the word conflict, you think of people having an argument. If you have conflict with somebody in school, you might have an argument with your friend, you might have had a time where you've been told off by a teacher, and they're all examples of conflict. And just to kind of define that in more detail, so a conflict is a serious disagreement or argument, or to be incompatible or a clash. So if you've had a clash with someone, if you've had a serious disagreement with someone, that is a conflict. Now, disagreeing with someone on a small level isn't really a conflict. It tends to have to be more serious. So, for example, there might be a conflict when you maintain that you know you were at school on time, and your teacher might maintain that you got to school 10 minutes late. Now, that disagreement is a conflict, and you can just think about all the conflicts that you guys have in everyday life. But in geography, it's a bit more serious because different countries are at conflict with each other. So, different countries and different groups of people within a country are at conflict with each other. And that's a really important concept. We're going to look at that throughout today's lesson. And when we hear the word conflict in terms of countries, the first thing that most people come to is a war. So if there was a serious disagreement between Britain and Germany in the 1940s, as most of us should know, that led to World War II. But there is a slight difference in terms of their definitions. So a war is a state of armed conflict between different countries or different groups within a country. So, for example, Japan declared war on Germany. And so it's that armed conflict. That's the key difference here. That when we have our conflict, that's a disagreement. But a war is when we start to involve weaponry. So you might have a disagreement with someone, or you might have a conflict, but if that conflict escalates and you start using guns or swords or whatever it would have been throughout history, that's when it then becomes a war. And the two words are very, very similar, but we have to be careful that we don't use the word war in the wrong context. Because, for example, in the recent news, there have been examples of conflict that weren't war. So, a lot of us knew about the Black Lives Matter protests, and that is a really good example of conflict because people in America and across the world were in big disagreement with what government and what police forces were doing around the world. And so, the Black Lives Matter movement is an example of conflict. It's not a war, they're not arming themselves, they're not fighting with guns and tanks, but they are having a serious disagreement and they are trying to find a solution. More extreme examples of that, if you follow the news, you know that President Trump was recently, or they tried to impeach President Trump unsuccessfully. And there was a moment on the news where his supporters stormed the White House. Now, again, this is a key example of conflict because there's a very key disagreement about who should be in control of the government of the United States of America. And the people decided that they didn't like that, and so there was this serious disagreement, this conflict. And that's all happened just within one country, within America. But conflicts can happen on a far bigger scale as well. So it's almost impossible that you haven't heard the word Brexit in the last few years. And Brexit is essentially where the UK has withdrawn from the political union that is the EU. And it has led to lots and lots of conflict. There's been arguments on both sides about what the UK should and should not be able to do. There's been arguments about where there should be borders. There have been arguments about the trade, about defence, about security, about fishing. There have been lots and lots of disagreements. In fact, at one point, a British politician was arguing that we should actually put gunships in the British Channel between us and France to protect Britain. Now, obviously, that was just a showmanship, but it's an example of how conflict can happen. And this type of conflict is happening all around the world as we speak. Britain will be at conflict with other countries as well. America, France, Germany, Spain, Argentina all have conflict or disagreements with other countries. But it's really important to point out that 9 times out of 10, or even more than that, those conflicts are resolved peacefully. So conflict can be resolved peacefully, but there are occasions when it is not resolved peacefully. So war is an example of conflict, but conflict isn't necessarily a war. Okay? And if we look at this here, these are some examples of some major conflicts I've thought of. So have a look at this thing here. How many of these famous conflicts have you heard of? The Battle of Hastings, 1066, World War II, the Crusades, the Vietnam War, the English Civil War, the Boer War, the War of the Roses. Some of them you won't have heard of, and you'll be looking at them in history as well. But these are all examples of wars, and they're all also examples of conflict. But I'll say that again, that most conflicts do not result in war, and therefore most of them resolve peacefully. However, a lot of the course of history, armed conflict or war has been the outcome. And so a lot of us might think that World War II ended and Britain has won the war and that war doesn't happen anymore. Well, that's not true. So this map here is actually showing where armed conflict has taken place within a country. And this was in 2020, so just this year gone. So what I'd like to do is, there are 2 questions here. Which continents are experiencing armed conflict and which region has the most conflict? So if you pause that video now and then have a little think about those 2 questions. Okay, hopefully you've had a go at those 2 questions. Well, the continents I can see are in South America, Africa, the Middle East / in Asia as well. Okay, so all those regions have experienced conflict. You'll notice that armed conflict in Europe is not currently happening, with the exception of over here. This is the Ukraine. Okay, and that was a big conflict between Russia and the Ukraine. And the point here is that even in 2020, how many of these conflicts have we actually heard about? I mean, how many of you knew there was currently armed conflict in this many African countries, or around India, or around Southeast Asia, or around the Middle East, or the northern parts of South America? The fact is, we don't hear about these conflicts. And in this unit, we're going to be looking in depth at some of these conflicts, what's caused them, and how geography has influenced them happening to begin with. And so this is another map here, and this is basically showing major conflicts since 1990. And wherever there's a little circle, either red or yellow, that is showing an either international, so with lots of countries involved, or there's an internal conflict. You can see that there are an awful lot around the world, particularly in this area called Sub-Saharan Africa, the Asian stripe, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. And all those areas have therefore experienced this conflict on a much, much larger level. And so therefore it's very clear to conclude from this that the world experiences conflict on a wide scale, and it is happening a lot. And a lot of the time, the conflicts that we experience are resulting in war. And again, that we know has a very big problem, Because in our previous unit, we were looking at this area called the Yemen. And if you remember, we were saying that the Yemen had struggled to develop because it had been in armed conflict. Because of the conflict, they could not use their oil wealth to develop their country, and therefore their quality of life, their life expectancy, their literacy rate, all those factors have been dramatically reduced as a direct result of war. And so the reason why it's so important that we study conflict is because for some countries, it is literally holding them back from becoming a modern society. And so they're also very, very, what's the word? They're very, very complicated as well because no conflict is ever simple. It's never as simple as they don't disagree on too many things. There's always multi layers to them. We've got to understand that. But really, this will come into how geography is influenced by conflict as well. Because we've already seen conflict in Yemen, in the Middle East, and we will continue to look at other examples throughout this unit as well. So to finish off, the guys got 3 review questions. I'd like to answer these and upload them onto Satchel 1 as usual. So the first question is, what is the difference between conflict and war? I'd like to really explain that to me, please. Give 2 examples of a conflict and 2 examples of a war. And then finally, describe which areas of the world are currently experiencing conflict. To answer that question, I would advise you use this map. Please answer in full sentences as well. If you have any questions, in the first instance, you should rewind this video so you can re-listen to what I've said. Other than that, there's obviously the Zoom link available as well for any support that you may need. Any further questions, you can feel free to put them on the comments on Satchel 1. And a reminder that especially for that last question there, I would really like to put it in full sentences. Don't just tell me Africa, etc. Okay, thank you.